Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Bible and Life podcast. Once again, I am John Whitaker, and as we noted on last week's episode, we're kind of starting a new approach to things here on the Bible and Life, and so we now have a co-host whose name is Stephen Norris. So again, Stephen, welcome to the Bible and Life. Glad you're here.
Thank you, John. It's good to be back.
And if you missed last week's episode, you should go back and check that out because we really set up this topic that we're going to be talking about over the next handful of weeks. But we also introduced Stephen a little bit, gave you a little bit of backstory to him. And so for those of you who missed that, Stephen has been around since the beginning of this ministry and this podcast. He's just kind of been in the background, and we've had some great conversations, and it just seemed like a good thing to do to bring him onto the podcast and help the conversations here. So that's what we're trying out and seeing how it goes. And I really appreciate Stephen and his faith, his faithfulness, his family. But as a conversation partner, I appreciate his analytic mind, his questions, his thoughtfulness. And so I think you'll benefit greatly from having him along for these conversations as well. So with that, let's jump in. Last week, we began this topic of thinking through discipleship and disciple making. What does it mean to be a disciple? And we really focused just on one sentence, that the importance of having kind of a clear description, a clear definition of what a disciple is. And we based it out of the discipleship process that was just common in Jesus' day, that lie behind everything Jesus said, that he just assumed when he said, go and make disciples. He called us to be disciples. He had a picture in mind, and that picture, we said, is aptly summarized in Luke chapter 6, verse 40. And so we looked at that, and we gave this one sentence summary of what it means to be a disciple. We said a disciple is someone who arranges their life to be with Jesus in order to become like Jesus. And so we just kind of reflected a little bit on that sentence and gave a little bit of kind of some ideas and thoughts and insights on exactly what Jesus is thinking of, what we're thinking of by that sentence. On this episode, we want to hit that sort of center phrase in the middle of being with Jesus and just dive into that a little bit more deeply. That being with him in a very real sense is the heartbeat, the key to living as a disciple. That you and I, if we're going to be a disciple of Jesus, cannot do that without being with him. So that's the key to living as a disciple. And it really is the key then to being transformed. I like to think of it as like this transforming friendship or this transforming relationship that we have with Jesus, that if we attach ourselves to him in this relationship of being with him and arrange our life around that aim, that somehow we catch what he has. We kind of catch his character. C.S. Lewis referred to it as the good infection. You get a disease, you're with somebody who's got a cold or they got the flu, and all of a sudden you got a cold or you got a flu because you were around them. Well, C.S. Lewis pictures this as being around Jesus means you catch the good infection of his heart, his character, his loves, his life, his way of doing things. That's really what we're after and being a disciple. And the key to that is being with him. So the text I was thinking of in that regard shows up in the Gospel of John, right towards the end of Jesus's life before his crucifixion in John chapter 15. And the context for this little paragraph I want us to kind of read and think about is Jesus. It's literally the night before he's crucified, and he's been spending the evening with his disciples. It's just kind of giving them final words. He knows the morning he's going to be hanging on a cross. He knows it's come to that point. And so these are sort of in some ways these are like the final words I can give you before I die kind of thing. That's the context. And in that context, Jesus then says these words that are pretty famous. So maybe you have heard them before. I have shared them on this podcast before. Had a whole podcast way back in 2018 when we started the podcast out of this text. And so it's super important to us. But it says this. It says, Jesus speaking, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch of mine that does not bear fruit, he, God the Father, takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes it, literally in Greek, cleans it or prunes it, so that it might bear more fruit. Again, and when I worked at Edwards Greenhouse, we cleaned the geranium plants. We were famous for our geraniums at Edwards Greenhouse back in the day. Don't know if we still are, but we had thousands of them. And one of my jobs would be to go around and clean the geraniums, which meant I was breaking off all the dead heads, the blossoms that had expired, and now I had to pop all those off so that it would keep blooming through the whole season. Huge job when you got thousands of them hanging in a greenhouse. And so that's what Jesus is talking about, whether it's geraniums. In his case, he's looking at a grapevine, right? Same thing. You got to prune grapevines back every year. We actually had grapevines at Edwards Greenhouse. We made raisins every year out of all the grapes. But same thing. You got to prune those back every year. Then they grow fresh branches, and then they'll grow more clusters and all that. Same sort of thing. You got to prune them or clean them, get rid of all the dead stuff so they can grow new stuff. That's what he's talking about. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it that it might bear more fruit. And then Jesus says, you are already pruned or already cleaned because of the word which I have spoken to you. So his teaching, his word is his cleaning or pruning source in the imagery here. And then he says this, which is real central to what we want to reflect on in this episode. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I'm the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. Now he goes on, has a lot more to say about that in this section. But that imagery, while it's a metaphor, it does speak really of connectedness, attachment to. One translation says, stay tight with. All right, that's the idea of abide, and that speaks to this idea of, okay, being a disciple means you got to abide, you got to stay tight with, you got to be connected to or remain in, depending on your translation, Jesus. I guess at the practical level, outside of the imagery, the question is, what does that look like? What does it look like to abide in Jesus? You ever reflected on that, Stephen, at all?
Yeah, of course. What was hard about it is that it's easy to run off with all kinds of ideas and almost be paralyzed by analysis paralysis,
Yeah.
and overthinking it versus just keeping it simple and really spending time subtracting. And I kind of like that passage you brought up because it starts with talking about the cleaning or the pruning, and that it's got to be part of it. And I think we'll get to what keeps us from abiding in a few minutes, I imagine. But for now, I guess the way I would define abiding is just as with as you can be, as often as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I think is hard is in their context, at this moment, they've spent 3 years walking around Israel, literally with Jesus. He knows he's going to be crucified and everything's going to change over the next few hours and weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't fully have that. There's a literal witness for them. Challenges for you and me is it doesn't feel quite as literal. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I can't touch him. I don't know the tone of his voice always. I don't even know what his voice sounded like, right? Can't see the look on his face or his eyes. So it's a little different.
I remember as a kid, I always used to be so jealous of the disciples getting to see the miracles and get to, sleep next to Jesus and, get to watch all of his stuff and hear all of his sermons and all this stuff. And I always thought that was so cool. But um, as someone, I forget, probably my dad, um, later told me that um, they struggled too to be with Jesus and to understand what he was saying, even though they were there. And we actually have the benefit of all of Scripture and a lot of additional insight that maybe they didn't.
Yeah.
They of course had their pros and cons, but
Yeah.
we're in a great time of history to understand what it means.
Yeah. Yeah. And even in this context, Jesus, in the same conversation this night before his crucifixion, he talks about that he's going to send them another helper who's like him to be with them. And he's referring
Right.
to the Holy Spirit. So we get that benefit too, that
Hmm.
God by his Spirit comes to dwell in us and with us, in a very close, permanent sort of way. So yes, it's very different, but there still is a real relationship there, and there's still a real attachment and a real connectedness there that I think we need to foster and cultivate.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of liken it to, doing a really difficult thing with a really good friend, and kind of that bond that forms when you go through something really hard with a friend. Um, and you can call each other, on a moment's notice, and you get that bond where you kind of, or maybe even a backpacking trip or something where you're just kind of in this constant state of relationship with someone. And I kind of think of that
Yeah.
where you don't really, there's not really a break where um, your mind isn't long before you circle back to
Yeah.
that relationship.
Yeah. No, no, and that I think that's a good imagery for following Jesus over the long haul, right? The long obedience in the same direction where we're just via the Spirit, we're together all the time going
Right.
through this. Yeah. So you mentioned a second ago some things that you're like, well, we'll probably get to some things that keep us from doing that. And I know we were talking just before we started recording this episode, uh, this book that has also kind of been part of the thing that led to this conversation. You've been reading through it and reflecting on it, and you were even saying you really appreciated some of his insights on one of the key things that seems to make this abiding or being with really difficult. You mind sharing kind of some of those reflections with us?
Yeah. Well, um, in the book, you mentioned this idea of kind of where does your mind go to when you have, a spare second of thought, when you're not actively engaged in, a conversation with somebody else or doing work or whatever, real life thing that you have to deal with on a day to day basis. But between those things, and as you go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, he even mentions, those few seconds after you send an email at work when your brain gets to check out from sending that email, where does it go? And um, someone who's really been intentional about abiding in Jesus for a long time, um, their mind goes to God and kind of kicks back that, you know, strikes that conversation back up. And but there's so many things nowadays that are a distraction from that.
Yeah.
And if you're not really intentional about carving time out or taking that breath and trying to kind of refocus on God, it's easy to get through days or weeks or more without, you know, without even realizing when was the last time I really connected and poured into that relationship. It's
Yeah.
really easy to go
Yeah.
long
No,
time.
I just think um, that's so important for us to realize is that Dallas Willard, one of the things that he said it multiple times over the course of his life was that one of the greatest freedoms that we have as human beings is what we allow to fill our mind and what we allow our mind to be occupied with. But that's one of the greatest freedoms we have is because it affects so many other things in our life. And we live now in a time in history where there's so many things that can possibly occupy our mind at any moment, right? So it's like, oh, you get that spare moment, you send in an email. I got 2 or 3 minutes before I need to jump into the next task for work. I pick up my phone, I can scroll through my feed real quick, or
Hmm.
um, or whatever else it is, or I'll check the sports scores real quick, and it's all right at our fingertips because of our phones or because of our computers, or right. And so then all that stuff is just crowding out any whether it's with God or anyone else, really some relational space with other people or opportunities for more wholesome thoughts or opportunities just to quiet down our soul or whatever else it is. Our attention is consumed by so many things that we almost have no, it's almost like we almost feel like it's a bad thing to have unoccupied spare moments for our brain just to kind of go slack.
Yeah.
Just that. And then to go slack and intentionally just think about God for a second, to reconnect with Him, to thank Him, or to refocus our heart and soul on Him. And I think this being with requires that so much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everyone's talking about it. Society is finally kind of starting to understand it, but our phones and our digital devices and marketing and all these things, it's and AirPods and music at your fingertips and podcasts and just all these things, like it's really easy to fill every spare second
Yeah.
of every day with, some people fall asleep listening to things, or their alarm clock might even be music.
Yeah. Yeah.
which is fine, but it's just, you can pretty quickly unintentionally realize that 99.9% of all your time is filled, and there's no silence, and
Yep.
there's no slowdown time.
Yeah. And it does hinder all our relationships, including our relationship with God. In fact, I saw recently, and I don't remember exactly what it was. It would just struck me because it was like if you find that your the relational connection and kind of the passion and some of the energy is uh, kind of like just there's nothing really bad. It's just kind of in your marriage, just kind of that relational connectedness and energy and some of the passion just seems to be waning. There's a good chance that you've failed to put some appropriate boundaries on your cell phone in your marriage relationship,
Mm,
so that when you're sitting around, in the evening, instead of talking, you're scrolling or you're reading or you're listening or
yep.
and it's true not only in your marriage relationship, it's certainly true also in your relationship with God. Um, and I do think that's really really key. This book, Practicing the Way, I have this little quote written down where it just says the capacity to set the heart's attention on God, which is so basic to following Jesus, is the very commodity we are losing to the quote unquote attention economy. I think that's very true that whether setting our heart's attention on God, whether even being present to the people that we're actually with, we're losing that because we're losing our ability to actually, since everything's vying for our attention, we're losing our ability to actually focus our attention on anyone that we're present with. Certainly God, who's always with us, but he's not present in the same way as someone physical. So it even becomes
Yeah.
easier to ignore him.
Yeah. And the real kicker is that, um, a lot of these things can be perfectly good things, but they can just as much they can distract you just as much, even if it's, kids, your kids, or kids sports, or maybe your own sport or hobby, or things that are, it could even be exercising or cooking, or it could be
Yeah.
lots of different things, but it can still occupy all of that mental energy and space,
Yeah.
and you find yourself never making the time for the connection
Yeah.
with God.
Yep. No, you're right. That they're not in and of themselves bad or sinful things. You could be doing perfectly good things with all these, right? Like but there's just so many of them that they consume all your energy, your time, your mental space. Then they keep you from really turning the heart towards God. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what can we do? What are some things that might be helpful that you found helpful, at least in view of all the distractions? What are some things we can do to kind of cultivate the withness factor with Jesus, with God?
Yeah. There's lots of things, but some of the simple ones are, I mean, I've been reading through the book of Luke with my daughter, and I try to always point out, because it slips into uh, the story so often, where the first part of the story or the end of the story, whatever it is, and Jesus was off praying by himself, or that
Yeah.
you can tell it's a very big piece of his daily life, or maybe not daily. It's hard to tell when a day starts and ends when you're reading the scriptures
Yeah.
sometimes, but you can
But
tell that him getting away, especially with so much of a demand on his time and attention, the crowds are always trying to find him, they're always following him around, the disciples, but he's still getting away, and he's making time. And I think that's a big one, is just,
yeah.
it's it's like scheduled time
Yeah.
sometimes.
I think coming back to the theme of this, being a disciple, we don't just imitate Jesus in the public parts of his life, right? In the obvious parts of his life. If we're going to become like him, we have to pay attention to the hidden parts of his life, the behind the scenes parts of his life. And that's one of the
Mhm.
behind the scenes. What made Jesus the man he was? He often got away by himself to a lonely spot and prayed, as Luke repeats over and over again. So I do think, okay, how
Yep.
can we do that? How can we intentionally put the phone to bed, uh, turn off the noise, intentionally get away to a quiet spot where we can just be alone with the Father, be alone with Christ, and pour it into that relationship and deepen that relationship.
Yep. Yeah. One of the things, you know, carving out time, planning time in your day is obviously one of the huge ones. But um, I get my screen time report every week, and I'm always like, how is that possible? And so something I started this year, kind of in the new year, is one of my things I want to do better this year, was change my relationship with my phone. One, because I want to deepen my relationship with God, and I know that my phone is a distraction. But I also know that my kids, they're learning how to use their phones. By the way, they don't have phones yet, but they're still learning how they're going to use those by watching my wife
Yeah.
and I.
Yeah.
So, you know, multifold. But um, so one of the things I did this year was just I programmed my do not disturb to turn on when I arrive at home after work. And I have an accountability partner regarding phone distraction. And I text him at the end of every week, because my goal was to come home and put my phone on the kitchen counter, and not have it be my third hand anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and that's really just, it's changed my relationship with my phone, but it's also really helped me with this idea of abide, or, because it's so easy to, oh, I got a spare 1 minute, I have a spare whatever minutes, to pull the phone out. And if it's not in your pocket, or it's on do not disturb, um, it's just an easy way to take a big obstacle kind of out of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think we have to do those things. And here's one of the funny ones, the way I've had to approach that. This almost sounds backwards, but it works for me. Is I almost always have had my phone on silent. Um, and I've started having the volume on my phone. Uh, and the reason is, okay, I don't have to check it to see if I missed a text or missed an email or missed a notification that was important, because that was my excuse, right? I missed, so I need to check it, because it'll make noise if I get anything. So if I'm going to watch TV or with my wife, or if I'm even working, it's now sitting on the corner of the desk when I work with the volume on. So I don't even have to worry about looking at it because it'll make a noise if I need it, right? Uh, that has been
Interesting. Yeah,
helpful.
that's
It's almost backwards, but for me that helps. It takes the mental pressure off, because I have a, for my, for particularly for my kids and my wife, that I want to make sure I'm available to them, right? And it would
yeah.
seem like so often this thing wouldn't even buzz or vibrate, like it was supposed to on silent. And so I would all of a sudden realize, oh, Louise texted me like 20 minutes ago when she was at the store, probably needed something and I missed it. But it doesn't
Yeah.
do that when it's on. It rarely ever has that. It's still, so and it's like, okay, that has taken that pressure off from me feeling the need to check my phone. Because then you check it, oh, it's like, well, then I got a Facebook notification. I should check that too. And so
Well,
it's just,
I think that highlights the, you and me doing almost exact opposite things with our phones, but it kind of highlights the point of, um, we both did something on purpose to, you know, to try to improve the way we interact with our device,
yeah, yeah, to put it,
and so
yes, put it in its place.
everyone's got to go through that. They got to kind of inventory the things in their life, identify, we can all just say phones are one of them, but um, we got to identify what those things are, and kind of come up with a game plan on how can I improve this, or limit this, or subtract, or
Yeah,
I think it's a really important lesson, whether it's phones or whether it's
yeah.
something else completely.
What is it that's keeping you from intentionally arranging your life to be with God on a regular basis? Whatever that is, maybe it's you're up too late at night for whatever reason, doing whatever you're doing. So then you're too tired in the morning to get up to read and pray. Well, now you're going to have to find a way to put yourself to bed earlier so that you can get up earlier, or you're gonna. I'll stay up the same length of time, but instead of playing video games with my buddy, I'm done with that by whatever 10:30, and I'm going to use 10:30 to 11 to read my Bible and pray, or whatever it is. We're all going to
Hmm.
have to be intentional and figure out, how am I going to intentionally create a system in my life that cultivates this relationship with Jesus, where I'm with Him, where I abide in Him. The Greek word there is meno, which means to remain, or to live with, or to dwell. That's it. How can my life? How can I do life with Jesus intentionally? So whether it's in our prayer time or our Bible reading, but even maybe doing some things differently, I think is really important as well. So that when we're doing our work, we're also mindful of Jesus, and we regularly check in with Him as we're doing our work, or when we're going about our activities, and that we are figuring out ways to do those things mindful of and with Jesus, inviting Him into it, checking in with Him through it. So sometimes it's doing the exact same things we're already doing them, but doing them differently so that He's a part of it with us, and we're cognizant, we're aware of His presence with us. That's, I think, at the heart of this concept of being a disciple is being with Him, and at the heart of the specific passage in John 15 is that, how can we intentionally arrange our life to do it with Jesus? And one of the things where I ended off this text reading it as we began this podcast, it says, Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. If we're living not with Him. So in our unwithness, it weakens us as human beings. We don't bear fruit. We don't flourish. We don't fulfill the purpose for which God made us. And we don't actually live as genuine human beings. So being apart equals unfruitful and bad. Being with or abiding is fruitful and good. Fruit happens, human flourishing happens when we live in connection with Jesus. And that's why it's so central to our life. That's why it's so central to our discipleship. And that's why we're going to have to intentionally figure this out with our devices, with our activities, with whatever it is, how can we intentionally arrange our life to be with Jesus? So, as a disciple of Jesus, um, someone who wants to live as a disciple, we encourage you just to examine your life, to examine your witness, and to recognize that, okay, I need to figure this out. But please, as you do that with an attitude of grace and experimentation with yourself. Like any relationship, it grows with time. You get better with practice. And so be gracious, but intentionally begin to figure out how you can do life with Jesus for the sake of living as a disciple with him. All right. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bible and Life podcast. I pray that this discussion was helpful to you as a follower of Jesus, both for yourself, but also for helping other people follow Jesus well too. The Bible and Life is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that's made possible by the generosity of tons of folks just like you. So if you're one of those who have supported this ministry or continue to regularly support this ministry, thanks a ton. God is using your generosity to make a difference in the lives of people all around the world. And if you've been blessed or impacted in some way by this ministry, would you prayerfully consider joining the team of supporters? Easiest way to do that is to go to johnwhitaker.net, click the Give button, and it'll redirect you to my page with World Family Mission, where you can set up a one-time or a recurring monthly donation. Thanks a ton for your support.